Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. I was always wondering about the early days of a singer or a band's career. What did their family think about them going into a profession that was a bit uncertain? Were they supportive, or did they give their sons a hard time about it? Well, we're going to find out right now just what happened in the family members of the Beatles. First on the list is John Lennon. John was the one who created the group, the Beatles, so we'll start with him. According to the Beatles anthology by the Beatles, John said that his Aunt Mimi, he lived with her since his mother was unable to care for him when he was first born, wanted him to be a rugby type or a chemist. I was writing poetry and singing since she had me. All the time I used to fight and say, "Look, I'm an artist. Don't bug me with all this mess. Don't try to make me into a chemist." Okay, John said it was Elvis that got him out of Liverpool. It was from that moment on that he became interested in rock and roll. John's mother, Julia, taught him music when he was 16. She only knew how to play the banjo and ukulele, so she taught him banjo chords, and later he got to learning the guitar chords. John used to borrow a guitar, and then his mother bought him a guitar from a catalog. He said it was kind of crummy, but he played it all the time and got good practice. While John's mom was supportive of his love of music, his Aunt Mimi wasn't so sure about it. She told John, "The guitar's all right for a hobby, John, but you'll never make a living out of it." You can't blame Mimi for thinking that, because I'm sure she never knew anyone that made music a career. I don't know anyone that has either. So Mimi was being a loving aunt who was trying to steer her nephew in the right direction. The funny thing that happened was that fans in America put the quote and framed it in a steel frame and sent it to her. And John said that she had it in the house he bought her, and it was hanging on the wall to look at all the time. I guess John wanted to prove her wrong, and he did it big time. In the book Shout by Philip Norman, John's mother, Julia, loved to have fun and do practical jokes. She told John and his friends not to worry about school or homework or what their lives have in store. I guess she was like a free spirit, and John took after her totally. John's mom, Julia, died while crossing a street leaving Mimi's house and was hit by an off-duty policeman. She was trying to get to a bus stop, and the man that hit her was learning how to drive, and he wasn't accompanied by a trainer. He stated that she ran straight out in front of him, and he said he wasn't speeding and he couldn't avoid her. But out of this tragedy, there's one good thing, that Julia got to see her son doing what he loved doing best, performing in a band. It wasn't in the Beatles, it was in his first group, the Quarrymen. The date was July the 15th, 1958. John was 17 years old, and I know John must have loved having her sing and play his music in front of the crowd. As for Aunt Mimi, I didn't know it, but she saw John perform the same time Julia did. The website Beatles.fandom.com stated that Mimi and Julia saw Lennon perform with the Quarrymen at the Woolton St. Peter's Church Fete on the afternoon of July the 6th, 1957. Julia, who knew that Lennon would be performing, heard the music coming from a large marquee in the field behind the church hall and dragged Mimi along with her to listen to it. Lennon saw Mimi coming through the crowd and comically changed the words of the song to feature her name. Mimi related two versions of what she thought that day about seeing Lennon on stage: horrified to behold John in front of a microphone, and as pleased as Punch to see him up there. Mimi once asked this guy Parks to take her to the cavern to see Lennon play, but when she descended into the damp, dark cellar full of screaming teenagers, she shouted to Parks, "Get him out! Get him out! Tell him to come off the stage. He can't stay here. We'll have to stop this." And the Beatles' first trip to Hamburg also shocked Mimi. She wanted Lennon to continue his studies, but Lennon ignored her. And Lennon later placated Mimi slightly by exaggerating greatly the sum of money he'd be earning in Hamburg. When John and the other Beatles wanted to sign a contract with Brian Epstein as their manager, Mimi wasn't sure about that either. And she said to Brian, "It's all right for you, but if all this group business turns out to be a flash in the pan, it won't matter. It's just a hobby to you. If it's all over in 6 months, it won't matter to you, but what happens to them?" And Brian told her, "It's all right, Mrs. Smith. I promise you, John will never suffer. He's the only important one. The others don't matter, but I'll always take care of John." Okay, Mimi, she died on December the 6th in 1991 at the age of 85. while being cared for at home by Lynn Varco, an auxiliary nurse. Her main job was a mathematics teacher, but she worked for her mother for extra income. During the night, Mimi collapsed, so Varco helped her to her bed. And according to Varco, Mimi's last words were, "Hello, John." So I hope that they got together in heaven and having a good time together. John Lennon's had the support of his mom, and with her help, she taught him chords and bought him a guitar, which started his obsession with music. Aunt Mimi was always hoping that music was a fluke and that John would get to a normal life, but I think his success made her proud of him being that way. And next, we're going to have Paul McCartney. Paul said that both his parents were around 40 when they got married. Paul's father, James, Paul noted, was an instinctive musician. He played in a jazz band when he was younger, and James played the trumpet till his teeth gave out. His father played the piano at home, and Paul said they always had a piano. And Paul had a favorite memory of lying under the piano and listening to his dad playing Lullaby of the Leaves, and it's still one of Paul's favorite songs. Paul said his dad played the piano when he was born, and after he got into the Beatles, and he wanted Paul to do a song like Stairway to Paradise while in the Beatles. And they would always say, "Oh, we can't do that." But later, George Harrison and Paul were listening to an early Beatles song, Like Dreamers Do, and George looked at Paul and said, "That's your old man. That's Stairway to Paradise." His dad told Paul, "Learn the piano and you'll always be invited to parties." He sounds like a smart guy. And then Paul's dad bought him a trumpet as a teenager, and Paul learned to play it, but he soon realized he couldn't sing if he had the trumpet in his mouth, so he asked if he could trade the trumpet for a guitar, and Paul's dad said yes, and Paul got a Zenith guitar, which he still has today. And when it was on that guitar that he first learned the song 20 Flight Rock. Paul's dad must have been supportive of Paul's musical ambitions because he signed for Paul to go to Hamburg when the Beatles were first beginning. His dad thought by letting him go he might return to his senses and get back into college. Later, Jim, Paul's dad, would go to the cavern when they were just starting out in England to see what was happening. And when Brian Epstein wanted to sign a contract with the Beatles, Paul's dad wanted to talk to him first, and he was relieved when he spoke to Brian, and he let Paul follow his dream. Mary, Paul's mother, died when Paul was a teenager. She was a nurse, and she loved her boys so much. Mary was always thinking of her two children and wanted the best for them in life, even in her last moments. Her sister-in-law, Jill Mohian, who was with Mary when she died, said her last words she heard her say were, "I would love to have seen the boys growing up." Mary inspired Paul to write songs about her, the earliest being "I've Lost My Little Girl," and that great song, "Let It Be," that inspires everyone who hears it. According to the BeatlesStory.com, Paul McCartney is well known for his activism in support of environmental health and animal rights, which according to Paul was due to his mom's influence. Mary would often take Paul for walks through the countryside, and Paul attributes these frequent trips out of Liverpool for inspiring his love of nature at an early age. Though Paul's dad was a little reluctant to see Paul become a musician, I think he understood how Paul felt about music because he himself had been in a band and played an instrument, or should I say instruments. To do what he loved and make a living out of it had to make Paul's dad proud. Mary, Paul's mom, died before she could see Paul get started in the music business. I think she would have been supportive of her son, knowing how much she loved Paul and his brother, and she would be smiling and loving all he had achieved in his productive lifetime. The next Beatle we're going to talk about is George Harrison. George remembers music being in the house all through his childhood. The radio would be a variety of performers, from Irish tenors to Bing Crosby. His mother liked to listen to foreign music and would dial in until the station crackled out. There were also records in the house, English music hall music, and they even had a gramophone. And his dad would buy American records because he was a seaman and he got to go to the States every now and then. And he brought home Jimmie Rodgers. And the record, Waiting for a Train, inspired George to play the guitar. When George was in the hospital, that's when he decided he wanted to get a guitar. So his mom gave him money to buy one from a fellow student at George's school. It was a cheapo, but okay, according to George. And that got George started on his love of guitars. His father had played the guitar when he was in the Merchant Navy, but he had to sell his guitar after he got out of the Navy. And then George's dad remembered a friend of his named Len Houghton who played guitar, and he arranged for George to go to see him every week for a couple of hours, where he would show George new chords and play songs like Dinah and Sweet Sue and all the songs of the 20s and the 30s. George left school and was out of work for a while, and George's dad wanted him to learn a trade. And he had a brother who was a mechanic and another brother who did panel beating and welding. So George's dad decided that George should be an electrician. He was getting tired of George always asking him for money. When the time came for George to be allowed to go to Hamburg, his family was supportive even though George was only 17. And when the Beatles were working on becoming famous in England, George and his mom, Louise, were sitting by the radio all night listening to the record to be played. Louise got tired and went to bed, and later George raced up the stairs saying, "We're on, we're on." His dad was mad because he had to get up early the next day and go to work. Can't blame him there. Louise, George's mom, she seemed like a very sweet lady. One time when Paul visited George, he didn't have enough bus fare to get back home, so she gave him extra pennies to get him into Liverpool. George, though he loved the guitar and became obsessed with it, he had trouble in the beginning learning the chords. His mom would sit up late with him, encouraging him while he tried and tried. Then a funny story happened when Louise was in the tavern watching the Beatles play. Aunt Mimi was there, and George's mother was shouting and screaming at George like the rest of the crowd. She shouted, "Aren't they great?" to Aunt Mimi, and Aunt Mimi said, "I'm glad somebody thinks so." Well, we couldn't expect anything less from Aunt Mimi, and she just couldn't see John doing this. And I think Harry and Louise, George's mother and father, were very supportive of their son and his fans, and were his fans, helping him to move forward with his career in music. The last on the list, but not least, is Ringo Starr. Ringo's dad was a baker, and after Ringo turned 3, he decided that he had enough and left the family. His mother, Elsie, more than made up for his father being gone. Ringo was her whole world. If anybody picked on him, his mother would knock on their door and deal with them. Ringo said she was very loving. "I was an only child and quite ill, so I was the apple of her eye." Ringo got a stepfather when he was 13. He loved Harry, that was his name, and Harry worked as a painter and a decorator on an American air base, and he gave Ringo comics and records. And when Ringo was in the hospital, that's when he became interested in the drums. Later, when someone in his stepdad's family died, he went to another town and happened to see a drum kit for £12, and the whole family gathered up to get money for Ringo so he could get it. So that shows how supportive the family was toward him. His mother, Elsie, worked as a barmaid and held several other jobs to support her and her son. She would go to work after spending time with Ringo in the hospital. We were poor, but never in rags. I was lucky. I was her only child, and she could spend more time with me, said Ringo. Elsie would save everything that Ringo did as a Beatle, and she was his biggest fan. Ringo said, later, even when I was in the Beatles, she must have emptied my bag or my pockets when I came home and put random things away. I never have saved that stuff. There were notes and memos from Brian. The band's manager, Brian Epstein, said, "Make sure you look smart tonight, lads. It's a big show." That woman loved every second of my life and remembered every second of it. So it sounds like she was quite a lady, and Ringo was lucky to have her for a mother. So there you have it. All the Beatles had very loving families. Even Aunt Mimi loved John enough to let him follow his dream of being a rock and roll star. It's neat to see how all the guys had a family that were always there to inspire and support them, especially their dreams of being famous and playing music that all the world would come to love. Thank you, family members of the Beatles, for forming individuals that never gave up and went on to create the Beatles, a band that will live on forever. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate that. If you like it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe if you could. And tune in soon for another story about the Beatles. I love finding out about them, and I hope you do too. Have a great evening or a great day, everybody. Bye.